Welcome to the next level of your greatness by Andreas Dudas, the Legacy Maker podcast. In these episodes, Andreas shares some powerful stories of great people who are positively shaping the world of tomorrow with their purpose-driven legacy. It's Andreas's goal to extend his personal tools and even mistakes to the greater community of those who wish to transform their life while gaining extraordinary success, not only on a personal journey, but with others, and interviews with those who've created a legacy of impact from all over the world on 5 continents. And now here's your host, Andreas Dudas.
Nick, a whole heart welcome from my side. We've been speaking already a little bit together. It's a real privilege. It's an honor, to meet you. We met for the first time, I guess, in 2014. As you mentioned, my wife had a very nice surprise for me, and invited you, but also a personal mentor. I've always had a dream to meet Nick Wiliams once, because the first book I read was the work we were born to do. It is still my favorite book. Yeah, Nick, many people know you in the UK, in the US, in the English-speaking world, across Europe, most probably, but many people do not know you yet. So could you introduce yourself just quick? I mean, what does it mean quickly? You've led a long life, you have a huge journey behind you, and lying ahead of you still. But please tell the audience quickly who you are, what is your passion, what is your focus right away, please.
Thank you. I remember very fondly back to 2014 and getting this lovely email from Antoinette saying, "Any chance you can come to Switzerland?" And it's just such a joy. It's one of the highlights of my life to have done it as well. So thank you so much for that opportunity. So in terms of what I do, the work I do is as a writer and as a speaker and as a kind of coach, mentor, spiritual confidant to people in leadership. So they're the things that I do, but what we're talking about, I guess, is like, well, what's the impulse behind that? What's the purpose behind that? Why do I do those things? So I suppose one of the ways I would describe it is I like to think of myself as a kind of an awakener, that to some extent we're asleep to who we really are as amazing beings, spiritual beings. And each of us I've had plenty of people that have played a part in awakening me to my gifts and my purpose. And I see myself now as somebody who has spent the last 3 decades really doing that for other people, awakening them to their true nature, to their true creativity, to their leadership, to their power, to their spiritual nature, to their loving nature, really. So that's what I see my purpose is. And I also, in terms of purpose, I like to think in terms of a calling. One of my kind of underlying beliefs, which has informed my work, is that I don't think we arrive here as blank slates. I think we arrive here with a calling, literally etched upon our heart. There's a life in us that is for us to live out in this lifetime. We come with gifts. We come with leadership abilities, many of us, and our job is to kind of contribute those to the world. So I tend to think of purpose as a calling. It's something that is in us to deliver to the world. And sadly, I would think the vast majority of people never even get to know they have a calling, let alone live it out fully. So I'm still very passionate about leadership being a calling, not just a position.
One question, I have not noted, but when you're telling about calling, the purpose is a calling. And if we believe the statistics, just a couple of weeks ago, the NZZ, Neue Zürcher Zeitung, one of the larger newspapers in Switzerland, wrote an article about how many people are looking for a new job, more than 30-40%, which means they're looking for meaning, they're looking for deeper purpose, not just for a new job. I think COVID was one of the reasons, and all these lockdowns, why a lot of people have started to think about the meaning of their lives, and many people, or also the statistics, claim that less than 10% really dare to live up to their true purpose. So what do you think, what are the major barriers in order to overcome for first discovering the purpose and then also living up to the purpose. What do you think? What's the reason why so few people live up to this true purpose, to this calling?
Well, yes, at the bottom line is it's a single word, really. It's fear. But we have conscious fears, we have unconscious fears, we have subconscious fears, we have fears we don't even know we have. So I think it all comes down to fear. We fear we can't make a living out of doing something that's meaningful to us. We fear changing. I think one of the big fears that many of us have is a fear of not belonging, a fear of being somehow kind of cast out if we don't fit in and do what everyone else is doing. I know that was one of my big fears years ago when, I was in a corporate career selling computers to banks in the city of London. And I felt like it wasn't why I was on earth. But part of me went, but if I step off that conventional career path, I'm just going to be doomed. And I think what most people don't realize is that they have a path to create, not a path to follow. Most of us have been brought up to follow a path that other people have set out for us to some extent, norms to adhere to and rules to stick to. And it's not that we're going to be rule breakers particularly, but it's like we create our own path as we walk. And I think a lot of us kind of get very scared because we go, well, I can't see the path. When I look at my life today and think back to 30 odd years ago when I was selling computers, I could never have dreamed I would be where I am today. Somebody had said to me, 30 odd years ago, you're going to write all these books and you're going to get invited around the world and you get to meet amazing people. I'd have laughed and said, that's stupid. I could never do that. So it's also a kind of, and I think this is a lot of the work that you do, is helping people understand they're so much more powerful and resourceful than they believe they are. So most of us fear we're not up to the job, if you like. And for me, part of my path has been rediscovering the power that I've had that I didn't realize I had. And it's not a power over, it's a power to inspire. It's a power with people. It's a power to connect. And there's another word that I've begun to think of recently as well, which is, I think what many of us do, in an answer to your question, why don't we change? I think there are seeds in each of us, but those seeds are lying dormant. And part of that kind of awakening role is that something needs to get activated in us. So, what I did for many years through writing books, and many people do this, is like I was somebody who was writing and speaking, and I know that as a result of what I would say or how I was, something would get activated in other people, just as other people had activated things in me. So it's like the seeds that need to have water poured on them to bring them to life, if you like. So those seeds in people don't get nurtured. And I think that's another reason that a lot of people don't follow their purpose, is they haven't been awakened yet, if that makes sense.
How can we human beings either awaken ourselves, or how can you or other people, coaches, help people to discover this purpose? Is there a methodology? Are there some recipes we can learn? Or, I mean, you say you create sort of your purpose of this journey, you do not just follow the journey. So, which means it also takes a lot of courage to create something new. And a lot of people are stuck in their, let's put it that way, daily issues. They're scared. I have a family. I have to make money. I have a very secure job, whatever it means. From my point of view, there's no security at all, But all the same, they say, okay, I cannot afford to follow or even create this journey. So would you advise, I mean, how can people discover or start this journey? What's your advice?
Well, as we've said, the first step is to awaken to something, because I think once you've been awakened in some way, you can't easily go back to sleep. It's too painful, because like you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't understand what you've come to understand. So it does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of spiritual courage, emotional courage, but also it does require kind of cleverness. It requires intelligence. I grew up with people that had always had jobs. I'd never been an entrepreneur. I didn't really know what an entrepreneur was. I had to learn about running my own business and being entrepreneurial and realizing, I was brought up to be very compliant, if you like, and do what I was told. But to be an entrepreneur isn't about doing what you're told. Being an entrepreneur is about waking up and leading the way, usually with something new. So, it's there are so many things I could suggest, but it's about becoming entrepreneurial. It's about believing in yourself. It's about shedding skins of old limiting beliefs and adopting new, more powerful beliefs. Even for me today, after all that I've done, it's very easy for me to go back into self-doubt. I will never stop, but I have days where I really doubt myself, So another thing I think we all need is community and friendship. People that help us believe in ourselves and encourage ourselves. Because, again, most of us, in my experience, have a very fierce inner critic. We're always, being very hard on ourselves. So I think we also need people around us who believe in us, who champion us, who say, "Hey, you're just in some fear at the moment. It's not that you can't do this. You're just feeling afraid. And when you get your courage back, you'll be back on your path." You're right. There's so many ways we can fall off the path, but there's so many ways we can get back on it again as well.
What do you answer to people who tell you, "Yeah, Nick, it's fine, let's make an example. I'm a top manager, for example, or middle manager, it doesn't matter, So I earn a decent amount of money every month, I have my family, I'm stuck to a certain extent in a comfort zone, and then suddenly I feel or recognize or discover that my true calling is to become an artist, for example, because I have this passion for creating things or whatever it is." So most of the people, they are then reluctant to follow this path or this calling, because they say, "I will not make any money by being an artist," for example. Okay, let's forget it, but they will never become truly happy or truly fulfilled. What would be your answer, or how can you help them? Is there any help possible or necessary or at all, or what's your opinion?
What you're sharing is kind of in a way it's theoretical. I can only deal with kind of real life people at times, but what I'm getting at is it may not be like that. It may be that you're a manager, but actually you want to be a different kind of manager, or you're already a leader, and actually your purpose is to be a different kind of leader. For some people, it is a complete career change. For many people, it's an adjustment to what they're already doing. It's about showing up in a more authentic way. It's about showing up in a more real way. So my experience is it's not always as dramatic as, well, I've had a successful career doing this, now I've got to throw all that away and start again from scratch. It's not always like that in my experience. Sometimes it is, but it's more a kind of spiritual chiropractic. It's a little adjustment and to show up in a new way. One of the things that we talked about and, I'm passionate about is what I call inspired leadership. When you lead from a sense of inspiration. And relatively few people do that. But it's not because they're not inspired. It's just that they're out of touch with their inspiration. They haven't nourished it. So they need to kind of re-inspire themselves. It's not that they want to stop doing what they're doing. They just need to do it in a way that's more nourishing for them, that isn't so self-sacrificing. It doesn't burn them out in the same way. So often it's about an adjustment and perhaps an evolution of what we're doing, rather than it is a complete change of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. You have been, if I'm right, focusing or shifting your focus a little bit from purpose, or from these books you've written about calling and finding your purpose and so on, towards this leadership issue, right? So let's make an example. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, or Mother Teresa, and all these famous people who left a true legacy. They have, from my point of view, a few things in common. They have found their purpose, they dared to follow their purpose, and they became true leaders, although they've never had a management position in their lives, So let's talk a little bit about leadership. You mentioned a very interesting word, inspiration, Can you explain to me and to our listeners what inspiration means to you? First, what does it mean to be to inspire, and how can we inspire ourselves or find this sort of re-inspiration you mentioned?
Well, I think the Latin meaning of inspiration is to breathe in. It's something about being touched by spirit. Um, and one of the ways I describe inspiration, it's like smelling salts for our soul. You know, our soul is there, but generally, you know, I don't watch the BBC News here in the UK for half an hour and think, gosh, the world's such an inspiring place. I'm so glad to be alive at this time of history. Most of the world does not convey inspiration. So it's easy to think that inspiration doesn't exist. But inspiration is something available to all of us, I believe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I believe that inspiration is speaking to each of us all the time. It's like a radio frequency that's always being broadcast to us. That's my belief. I'm not saying I'm right, but it's my belief. And there are certain people that are tuned into it, who, if you like, you know, going back to what we were talking about being activated. So an inspired leader is somebody who isn't just filling in the ticks on the job description. I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that. They are living from the inside out, if you like. They know they have gifts. They know there's something they truly care about. They know there's something that they're here to create in the world or bring into the world. And that's where the inspiration comes from, is they're causing something to exist in the world that didn't exist before. What was the other? Oh, and one of the things I've been bold enough to do for myself over the last few years is to kind of redefine leadership. Because when I was growing up here in the UK, you know, in the 1960s, to me, leadership was about having a position, having a job title, having privileges, and it all being about having power over other people. And how I've come to think of leadership now is any act of love, any act of inspiration, any act of bringing something beautiful into the world, any act of reconciliation, any act of healing or forgiveness is an act of leadership. So leadership has nothing to do with having a job title, or need not have anything to do with having a job title. So where I got to is like every single one of us can lead in every single moment if we choose to, whether or not we have a position of leadership or not. And also, therefore, that leadership is a calling, not a job title. And what I love is when I get to meet people who combine the two, who have a job title of leadership, but also bring their calling to leadership together. They're the people I love to meet. You know, I don't have a job title of leadership, but I've chosen to offer leadership in the world. Same with you. You don't have a job title of leadership. I've never run an organization. I did for a while, but it only had about 3 people working in it, you know, and a bunch of volunteers. So I've never run a big company. But I've offered thought leadership. I've offered idea leadership. I've offered, that creative leadership rather than positional leadership. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I've come to think of it. That all of us can offer leadership. It doesn't have to do with a job title. It's to do with bringing more love and beauty and inspiration and healing into the world.
Does it mean, sort of a first conclusion, you know, from my side, if I live up to my true calling, I'm becoming an inspiring leader automatically, you know, it just happens. Even if I do not run a company, or even if I do not lead hundreds, dozens, a few people, I'm becoming a leader, like Gandhi, for example, or all these people who have lived up to their purpose. Is that right? I mean, so this means living up to my calling, I'm I'm starting to inspire other people and becoming a leader. Is that right?
Yeah, I think yes. You know, my caveat would be, you know, some people follow their calling, but their personality can be very judgmental. They're not necessarily nice people. You know, they have difficult personalities. But the other side of it is, yes, you know, I think what happens is, you know, the language I use is when we begin to show up, people begin to be attracted to what we're doing. not that we just find followers, but we find people that are inspired by us. If I go back to 35 years ago when I left my corporate career, I'd given a couple of talks. I had no career. I just had a kind of a heart full of dreams and some ideas, and I just felt this calling just to start talking to people and creating opportunities. And as I began to show up, opportunities began to show up. So I do think there are, the language I use is there are greater forces at work. And when we show up, those greater forces can begin to operate, because I think the problem for many of us is like, well, when things turn out, then we'll show up. And my experience is when I show up, things begin to work out. Can I share that one of the quotes that I said I might share?
Yes, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Because for me, this also ties in with the whole idea of legacy. I'll read the quote and then I think you know it, but I'll explain it for people that are listening. It says, when you work only for yourself or your own personal gain, your mind will seldom rise above the limitations of an undeveloped personal life. Here's the bit I love. It says, but when you are inspired by some great purpose or some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break your bonds, your mind transcends limitations, and your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And there's so much I love about that quote. But for me, the idea is that inspiration is like, it's the nutrient for our soul. We need to feed our own sense of inspiration. So some of us I think the trap we fall into is we're waiting to feel really inspired. But actually, when we get into action, we become inspired. When we find our courage, we find our voice, we find our creativity. So there's the quote. I wanted to share the quote. But then in terms of a legacy, do you remember where that comes from? I can't remember if you remember.
No.
That comes from Patanjali, who was the founder of the Yoga Sutras. Now, that was actually written 2,200 years ago. Now, in terms of a legacy, I feel like, Patanjali must have died at least 2,100 years ago. But to me, it's like Patanjali has held a hand across time and space to speak to me directly. He left a legacy that has spoken to me so deeply and has probably spoken to millions of people deeply. But I doubt that he woke up every morning going, how can I leave a legacy for Nick Wiliams in 2,000 years' time? So to some extent, there's this kind of magical, mysterious dimension to legacy as well. I think there's a dimension of it that we can consciously do things to create a legacy. But then I think our job is also just to share our gifts, to share our voice, to put things out into the world. We don't know how they're going to land and where they're going to land. I don't know if somebody might read one of my books in 100 years' time and be inspired by it. I have no idea. All I can do is write the book and put it out and give it to the world. In a way, it's not my business.
So this means if we dare to reach deep inside ourselves and we dare to show up, as you mentioned, which means we just take actions, or let's put it that way, inspired actions. I just read a book for the third, fourth time, written by Jack Canfield, and he also wrote about the law of attraction and stuff like that. And he always talks about inspired actions, not just doing things in order to reach something, but just to listen to your heart and doing just one right, effective thing based on your soul's calling in order then to follow your bliss. And I think this means showing up, right? To reaching deep inside yourself. That's very interesting. And also the quote, very nice. But let's get back to leaders. That's really interesting to me. So leaders have also the obligation and also the privilege to a certain extent to build up legacies through their companies, through what they are creating, right? And most of the people in management positions, they are stuck in I think, wrong belief systems to a certain extent. And they also lack the courage to move out and to show
Mm,
up. Because it takes a lot of courage to say, listen, I feel like this and I feel a calling, and I
mm.
want to show this calling and so on. What do you think? What does it take in order to reach a certain, let's put that, a certain level of consciousness, for starting to daring more to move out and to show up? Have you already reached a certain level of consciousness in companies out there in order to get inspiring leaders, or what's the status? What do you think? What's your
Mm.
experience?
Well, I think the two words that come to mind in answer to your question really are, the two words are firstly authenticity.
Mm,
You know, a lot of people are afraid to step from behind their roles and how they think they should be. Another part of my philosophy, if you like, is, so many of us have a kind of idealized version of how we think we should be and how we think we should show up in the world. But generally, it's based on feeling like we're not good enough in the first place. So I'm not good enough, so I need to be this better version of myself.
mm,
Whereas I think what's really powerful is to be authentic and say, I'm just going to show up anyway. I don't necessarily feel that confident. I'm going to share something that makes me feel vulnerable, but I
mm,
am going to share my authenticity.
mm,
So firstly, the willingness to step by step be more and more authentic rather than just stick to the roles, if you like. And secondly, to be authentic, in my experiences, causes us to be vulnerable.
mm,
And most people don't have a great relationship with their own vulnerability. They often see their vulnerability as a weakness. I've got to be really certain, I've got to show up as a powerful person all the time. If I show up and show any vulnerability, then people are going to seize on my vulnerability and they're going to take me down, or they're going to shame me, or they're going to do something horrible to me.
mm,
So it does take a lot of courage, A, to be authentic, and B, to develop a healthy relationship with our vulnerability. But I
mm,
think all the leaders that I've met who I really value, and really I find inspiring, share their vulnerabilities in appropriate ways with the people that they work with. Um,
mm,
just to give you one example, one guy I worked with, he was an Olympic athlete, um, and now he had one job, and then he joined a company and is still there after 8 or 9 years. We've been working together for maybe 3 years, and I think one of the biggest things I've helped him learn is the power of him just opening up and sharing his feelings with people in an appropriate way. And he was having a lot of power struggles. He was somebody who could easily get into conflict, um,
mm,
both with his own CEO, with his peers, and potentially some of his staff. A conflict was never far away. But what I just kept encouraging him to think is, what's underneath? What's the vulnerability underneath the fear? And when he was able to reconnect more with his own vulnerability and went, oh, actually, I'm feeling scared, which is why I tend to attack people. If he said, actually, I'm feeling scared about this to people, they responded in such a positive way to him. And he has just built so many great collaborations, great partnerships, because he's willing to be more open than he's ever been. So it's not, on one level, it's not rocket science. I think we all have a hunger for authenticity and for people
mm,
that show a bit of vulnerability. I think certainly for me in the UK, it's why we get so disillusioned with politics, because
mm,
nobody shows any vulnerability.
mm,
Nobody shows any authenticity. It's like, here's the press release, and I'm just going to read the press release.
mm, mm,
um, and we crave that authenticity. I think we crave that humanity. To me,
mm,
it's the common humanity. When we share our feelings, we touch into everybody's common humanity.
mm. So we know so many, let's put it that way, great leadership development programs all over the world. There are very renowned institutes, organizations, universities, business schools, and so on. What do you think in terms of helping to develop such type of leadership driven by love, by passion, by authenticity, by purpose? And do they already exist, such leadership programs? Or what would be maybe your dream or your vision in terms of building up something like that? Or what would be your recommendation? Do we already have such organizations, universities out there? Or what do you think? What do we have to change? How could you inspire other people, inspire even more in order to reach a new level, let's put it that way, of leadership greatness, for example?
That's a great question. So the answer is no, I'm not particularly aware of a training program. I've had thoughts to do it myself over the years. But it would be, I think, I don't know these programs that you're talking about particularly. I think for me, it would be about developing character, developing the person, getting the person to grow personally. And then, by all means, put strategy and cleverness and intelligence on top of that. But I think all the cleverness in the world will not make up for a lack of wisdom and a lack of authenticity. That's my sense, is what we need to be teaching is who we are, not just how clever we can be. That's my take on it.
Okay, great. You mentioned at the very beginning, before we started our interview, that you would like to share also a poem or another quote. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, because as I said, I've got some, if you like, underlying beliefs, which
Yes.
inform how I operate, how I live, and a lot of people like. So one is we have a calling etched upon our heart. We don't arrive as a blank slate. We have unique gifts is another one. And I think what inspiring leaders do is that they simply recognize and share their gifts. And by doing so, they help other people remember their gifts. I immersed myself in a lot of thought leadership in the spiritual, creative areas. And eventually part of me went, I think I could do this. So being in the presence of other people's gifts made me realize maybe I've got some.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a poem by a guy called Greg Kimura. I can send it to you if you like, and you can post it with the video. It's called Cargo. So can I just read it to you now?
Yes, please, please.
I only came across this a year or two ago myself, and I just fell in love with it as soon as I heard it. So it's called Cargo by Greg Kimura. You enter life a ship laden with meaning, purpose, and gifts, sent to be delivered to a hungry world. And as much as the world needs your cargo, you need to give it away. Everything depends on this. But the world forgets its needs, and you forget your mission. And the ancestral maps used to guide you have become faded scrawls on the parchment of dead pharaohs. The cargo weighs you heavy the longer it is held, and spoilage becomes a risk. The ship sputters from port to port, and at each you ask, is this the way? But the way cannot be found without knowing the cargo, and the cargo cannot be known without recognizing there is a way. And it is simply this: you have gifts. The world needs your gifts. You must deliver them. The world may not know it is starving, but the hungry know, and they will find you. And when you discover your cargo and start to give it away.
Wonderful. It's great. Very inspiring. Great.
Yeah, but I truly believe that. I truly believe that every single one of us has a cargo of gifts. And most of us have never been told what our gifts are. We've never really discovered them. And when we give them away and we witness the value that people give us when we give our gifts to people, that becomes a motivation and inspiration to deliver our gifts. And as we deliver our gifts, we leave our legacy.
Okay. Nick, another question, or maybe the last one. We have already reached almost, I spent 35 minutes, The question is, you've performed so many great things. You've written many books. You delivered speeches. You inspired thousands, if not millions, of people. Right? There's still some time lying ahead of you, and as we discussed, legacy will just happen. I think if we live up to our purpose and we share our gifts, we leave a legacy, whatever it is. It does not matter whether it's really big or it's just a legacy, right? Do you have some vision, for the future? Or what would be, to put it another way, how would a perfect world look like from your point of view? This is my definition for a vision, right? Are there some dreams, some visions, or what are your future plans, Nick?
So thank you. Yeah, I do. Number one is to bring more humour into what I do. At the end of last year, I actually did a course on stand-up comedy, which I've been
Oh,
meaning
great.
to do for a long time. So part of it is to lighten up a little bit more and use more humour in the way that I deliver what I do to the world. So that's one thing. The other thing is the work that's really inspiring me at the moment is the idea of what I call steward leadership. I don't know if you know a guy called Buckminster Fuller. Did you ever come across a guy?
Yes, yes, yeah.
He was a visionary and all sorts of things. And I remember reading a quote from him. He said, in essence, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, don't fight the existing reality. Just create something so new and beautiful that people want to be part of that instead. And that's what I believe is there's a realm of consciousness where all ideas already exist. But what they're looking for is willing human collaborators to bring them into the world. So the work that I'm passionate about now, and the kind of leaders that I work with now, are leaders who know that they're bringing something new and innovative and beautiful into the world through them as well as from them. And they're kind of building a team around that to be able to, the language I use is to be able to steward that idea into the world and make a big impact and make the world a better place because of this idea that they're bringing into the world. But the key difference is I really believe that these ideas want to exist. We're not trying to force something to happen that doesn't want to happen. We're, if you like, evolving humanity by allowing what wants to naturally happen to actually happen. So to me, it's the most natural form of leadership. It's just to create something new and beautiful and bring it into the world. And the more I talk about this, the more leaders go, you know what, I never really felt this was my idea in the first place. It just came to me. But the more I think about this, the more I realize I am stewarding this idea into the world. And I think of it as like being a gardener. A gardener takes a seed and it knows that the seed can become something. Its job is to cultivate and unleash the potential of that seed. And I think those are the kind of leaders that I want to help incubate more of, which is leaders who are cultivating the potential of an idea and making it happen to make the world a better place.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Nick. So, as a sort of final conclusion, would you like to share anything else with our audience, or there are so many people out there who will listen to this podcast through your inspiring words, through all your experience for sure, would you tell them or give any other useful advice or insight, in order to move ahead with their great calling they all have, like deep inside their heart?
Yeah, I guess as I look back on my life, it's like in a positive way, you have no idea what you're capable of. I think everybody listening and watching this, you, me, all of us have so much untapped potential that wants to be tapped into. So find every way that you can to find that potential, to find the gifts that you're delivering, find the gifts that you've got that you haven't delivered yet, and find ways of sharing them with the world. Because ultimately, I think the fulfillment that you'll experience comes from what you share, not from what you accumulate. So yeah, find ways of sharing the tremendous cargo of gifts that you have and sharing them with the people that need them.
Great.
And I'm always happy to have a conversation. So if somebody wants to get in touch, just drop me a line, nick@IamNickWilliams.com. I just love having these kinds of conversations. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for giving me this opportunity, and hope to have more like this.
Thank you for joining The Next Level of Your Greatness by Andreas Dudas, the Legacy Maker. If you're on a journey to create a legacy of impact, please subscribe so you can join this community with Andreas, who find the important and life-changing value of creating a purpose-driven legacy. For more information, go to andreasdudas.com. Remember, your legacy may just begin here.